Hello and welcome to the Flourishing Introvert Talks with me, Jo Rawbone. This is the podcast that celebrates the natural gifts of introverts so that we can flourish in all situations. Episode 331. Why is trust so difficult? Having mentioned trust in the previous episode about the introvert's route to respect, I thought I'd delve into this room next, as the door to trust is already ajar, so only needs a gentle push. And the reason I mentioned trust in the last episode? Because trust needs to start with self, just as respect does. I recorded episode 175 on what self-trust was and wasn't, so it's a perfect companion to this episode. This time I'm exploring trust in relation to others, and a rather uncomfortable thought hit me. Because we as introverts are so resourceful and independent, preferring, as we often do, solo work, how much do we actually allow trust to develop? And is our self-containment perceived as a lack of trust in others? You see, trust doesn't exist unless it's reciprocal. If I trust you, but you don't trust me, there is no trust. So, for most meaningful relationships in life, I think trust is essential. But it is by no means a given. And because we spend so much time either in the workplace with colleagues or working with them remotely, I believe we need to pay more attention to the state of trust that exists within us and between us. Much of what I'll explore here applies equally in personal and social settings, but I'm really interested in trust in the workplace, especially as research shows it's at a shocking low right now, as demonstrated by the high levels of grievance in business, government, media and NGOs. You may have even heard the term trust recession being bandied around, especially by some of the influencers whose reach is dwindling. In fact, the 2026 Edelman Trust Barometer has highlighted that the world is retreating towards insularity, with people narrowing their world to smaller, more familiar circles. Not much change there for we introverts maybe, but as you can probably imagine, it's bothering the global institutions. Given that so much of the work I do is with professional service firms and their employees, I've often used David Maister's trust equation as my starting point. I'll probably refer to it a little later on here too, but this time I have a different starting point. It's by Charles Feltman and it's called The Thin Book of Trust. But don't let the title fool you. Great things can come in small packages too, you know. Before I get to that though, the first thing I feel I need to be really clear about is that trust is dynamic. It's not fixed. It's not a once and done thing. It requires ongoing attention. So we can't rely on it being here today just because it was there a moment ago, or yesterday, or last week. Sure, people would prefer it if it was more mechanical or simply process-driven, but there's more to it than that. In fact, one of the things that often makes it so difficult to teach or train as a concept is that it is more than behaviours and intentions. Trust is something we feel in our guts, our nervous systems, and our spidey senses. I remember when I was new to a particular organisation I was working for, and something was telling me to keep my wits about me. The behaviour of my boss, a self-proclaimed bon viveur and all-round extrovert, was alarmingly inconsistent. I think the alarmingly is warranted, as none of us are completely consistent. We're human after all. His inconsistency meant it was difficult for me to know what I would be met with from one day to the next, and the first thing to suffer was the trust I felt I could have with him. Now, at the time, this was quite unusual for me, as my default is to trust first, until you prove to me that you're not to be trusted. And his inconsistency provided me with evidence that I couldn't ignore. And yes, for those of you shaking your heads in disbelief, I have been caught out on more than one occasion by my default. And this could have been another, except my spidey sense, my intuition detected something in his inconsistency that I couldn't name or articulate clearly, but I could sure feel it. So let's spend a moment talking about some of what trust isn't. I've already mentioned that trust is not fixed but dynamic, and depending on how much it matters, it needs almost constant but not obsessive attention. We still have to do the work we're being paid to do. Trust is not just about being likeable or agreeable, although it's hard to trust a complete arsehole. I mean, maybe respect them for their drive or achievements, but I'm unlikely to trust them. Trust is not blind faith. I wish some of those who don't question the motives, morals, or messages of the influencers they follow would take this one on board. We still need to be curious and question people in the process of trusting. Linked to that, trust is not compliance, just as respect isn't compliance. Agreeing to things in order to impress doesn't create real trust. It's another example of self-abandonment or virtue signalling. Time to trust yourself more. Oh, and here's a good one. Trust is not oversharing, unguarded, or fast disclosure. Emotional splurging, as I referred to it the other day, is not a marker of or an invitation to trust, and yet some try to use it manipulatively. All of which begs the question, what is trust, and do we need it or desire it? I doubt many of us will need to trust another with our lives as service men and women do, but here is why I need trust in those I work with. And remember, a need is something without which we don't function well. I don't function well in environments where there is a lack of trust. Trust reduces my stress load and calms my nervous system. If I'm confident that someone has my back, that they are honest with me even if I don't like what I'm hearing, and they will have unconditional positive regard for me, I'm more likely to flourish. Trust enables me to build psychological safety so I can be myself without apology and continue becoming the best version of myself. And the workplace metrics show that trust increases the speed and efficacy of decision-making, improves collaboration, and enables considered risk-taking, or those small experiments that I talk so much about. There are many more benefits too, and they take work just as trust takes work to build and maintain. And it's here that Feltman's Thin Book of Trust enters the arena. He talks about trust being a conscious assessment involving risk, vulnerability, and expectations. His definition is as follows. Trust is choosing to risk making something you value vulnerable to another person's actions. In other words, I'm willing to put something that's important to me in your hands, either for safekeeping or for action. So there's no automatic or unconditional yes when it comes to trust. As I've said before, trust is dynamic. Feltman goes on to say that in deciding who we can trust, we consider the other person's reliability, their sincerity, their competence, and their care. Meister, a professional services guru, talks about trustworthiness being a function of credibility, reliability, and intimacy, the ability to build relationships, all divided by self-orientation. So we can see some similarities, but I'm quite taken with Feltman's 4 qualifiers, so we'll use them more often from now on. And here's why. Because trust is dynamic, The results of my assessment means it may not be a full house every time, but I may still trust. I know people whose sincerity I don't doubt, but whose reliability is flaky. In that instance, my trust in them will be reduced, especially on time-critical things. Likewise, I know people whose competence is exceptional, but whose care is somewhat lacking. So I am unlikely to trust them with my innermost thoughts and emotions. It's unlikely these people will get access to the tender, sacred me that I talked about recently in episode 327. And because this is my assessment in the moment, it is also my truth in that moment, not anyone else's. I own that assessment, and it doesn't make it a universal truth. Here's what's interesting, though. If my assessment doesn't result in full trust or conditional trust where it might be trusting them for something specific, there are two other options. It may result in distrust, where I really don't trust them, where I feel myself bracing, closing off and distancing myself whenever possible. Or it might result in mistrust, where I have that strong sense of dis-ease, where my spidey senses are on high alert, and where my intuition is saying, nah, don't jump in, Jojo. I'll probably stay with my curiosity on this one, and in the past I would have used Meister's equation as a diagnostic to establish what's missing. Now I'll be using Feltman's qualifiers either instead of or alongside that. So pay attention to the signals in the world around you, to the messages your body is flagging for you, and be discerning. My default might be to trust, but it's not the default on all four of those qualifiers I've realised, meaning I'll trust some with some things, but not everything. And there's nothing wrong with that. Not everyone deserves my depth or my trust. The question this may leave you asking relates back to my earlier concern about whether our self-containment as introverts is perceived as mis- or distrust. How might people assess you on your reliability, your sincerity, your competence, and your care? And how might you find out? No one expects you to be all things to everyone, of course, but you might like to find out how you're assessed by those who play an important role in your life. Because in these trust-ravaged times, there is always room for more meaningful trust. And maybe trusting doesn't have to be so difficult after all. If you enjoyed this episode as much as I did, then please subscribe, rate us and leave a comment, because we know that helps other people find the podcast. And if other people find us, other introverts can flourish.
You are listening to an Intentional Media Production podcast.